Welcome, everybody, to the 26th episode of Stories from the Last Territory, a podcast that covers the golden years of wrestling in the island of Puerto Rico. My name, like always, is Luis Cuevas, better known as the Caveman, and I am your host for this trip back in time to the greatest feuds in the history of Puerto Rico. If you like what you hear and see, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or look for us in audio both at Spotify or on Apple Music at Stories from the Last Territory. I want to thank everyone who saw our documentary of the arenas of Capital Sports and all the good feedback that I received from that little documentary that I did on my last trip to Puerto Rico. If you've not seen it, well, I'm going to leave the link on the bottom of this video so you can check it out. For the next couple of episodes, we're going to do something different. We're going to be taking a year-by-year look at Capital Sports Promotions, and we're going to be starting with the year 1980. This is a very pivotal year for Capital Sports Promotion, and I think this is a good starting point, right, for what became the golden era of wrestling in Puerto Rico, in my opinion, the years 85 to 87. I want to throw a little disclaimer here. I was not present on this time in the island, as I live in Chicago from the summer of 1979 to the summer of 1982 when we moved back to the island. So I was out of the loop concerning wrestling in Puerto Rico during this time. But this was a very interesting time in wrestling in Puerto Rico, as at the end of 1979, Capital Sports Promotion became an official member of the National Wrestling Alliance. So this was basically one of the last years before we start seeing some of the big changes in the quality of wrestlers that came to the island. And the NWA World title and the Universal title became such an integral part of the storylines of the promotion. Before I start, I want to thank historian Manuel Gonzalez for most of the information in this podcast, and also give him his flowers, as from the year 1990 to possibly the year 2000, he was the man who kept most of the records of wrestling in Puerto Rico, at least the ones that I read when I was in college in the United States. So he has been an invaluable help in preserving a lot of the history of wrestling in the island. Also, Matt Farmer, who kept most of the results and cards during all this era. So I want to give both of them their flowers for their help in making this podcast possible for this episode. It would be good to start with a little recap of the main angle that was going on in the year 1979. And the main angle throughout the whole year was basically the tag team of Dutch Mantel and Frankie Lane, better known as the Vaqueros del Mal or Vaqueros Locos, causing havoc in their war with Carlos Colon, Jose Rivera, and Huracán Castillo. They had a record of 10 sellouts in a row, in what became, to this day, one of the longest running feuds and most successful feuds in the history of the island. The main feud in the island at the end of 1979 was the feud between Abdullah the Butcher against Carlos Colon for the Puerto Rico Heavyweight Championship, where in the end of the year card that was held in December 15, Abdullah the Butcher defeated Carlos Colon by DQ. Yes, DQ in a street fight. But because there was interference by the manager of Abdullah the Butcher, Hugo Sabinovich, Carlos Colon asked for a barbed wire match for the Three Kings Day card. In the tag team scene, the Invaders had defeated the Funks for the World Tag Team titles to lose them back to the brothers from Texas. And the Funks were the tag team champions at the end of 1979. Ciclón Negro had just defeated Dick Steinberg to become the Caribbean champion, setting up for the Three Kings Day. And of course, Invader One was the North American champion. One thing about this era is that sadly, there's no video available at the moment of any of the matches that we're going to be discussing here in this podcast. Most of the stuff that we have are magazines that people have kept, magazine clippings, newspaper reports, and just written reports by people like Manuel Gonzalez and many others who have tried to preserve the history of this era. The year started with the annual Three Kings Day card in Puerto Rico. This time it was held in Juan Ramón Lubier Stadium in Bayamón. And this was the card that Capital Sports Promotion presented that day. Jose Rivera defeated Roger Kilby. Huracán Castillo and the Haiti Kid defeated Art Costello and Carolina Kid in a mixed tag match. Invader 1 and Invader 2 battled to a double count against Moose Murawski and Mr. Fuji. Ciclón Negro, as a champion, retained in a rematch against Dick Steinberg and Abdullah the Butcher retained the title when the barbed wire match between uh, uh, him and Carlos Colon. I'm sorry, the title was held up. There was a declared no contest, and the title was held up. Yes, how do a title is held up in a barbed wire match? Well, only in Puerto Rico where you see this kind of results of a barbed wire match. But it is what it is. But from some of the pictures from that era, it seems like it was a very intense, violent match. And that set up a rematch in the January 12th card where Carlos Colon finally won the title from Abdullah in a street fight. During this time, Mr. Fuji had come to the island and quickly became one of the top rule breakers in the island, defeating Invader One for the North American title. And in that same card of January 12th, Roger Kilby and Dick Steinberg became the North American title holders by defeating Ciclón Negro and Jose Rivera. While Abdullah was out in one of his Japan tours, Carlos Colon became a tag team partner with a wrestler named Eric Flores, who did the Kevin Von Erich deal of wrestling barefoot and who wrestled for most of his career in the Vancouver, Portland area. So if you're a fan of the Vancouver or Portland area, you might hear this name, Eric Flores. He was a German wrestler, and Carlos Colon and him became the acrobats, becoming la pareja acrobática, becoming challengers to both the North American title and the World Tag Team titles. And right away, they became North American Tag Team holders, defeating the team of Dick Steinberg and Roger Kilby. In February, something interesting happened. Giant Baba came back to the island, but a difference in this time was that this time he came as a heel, having matches with the likes of Jose Rivera during this period of time. During this month, what was considered at that time the future of wrestling in the island debuted, and that was Cuban-born wrestler Rufo Gutierrez, better known maybe in Florida Championship Wrestling and in Georgia Championship Wrestling as El Gran Apolo. He debuted and he was being put super over. And his first match, he defeated Dick Steinberg in 4 seconds, which embarrassed Dick Steinberg, who was a main event wrestler during all this time in Puerto Rico. And he was one of the top heels also. And he challenged him for a rematch the following week, where again, Apollo surprised Dick Steinberg and defeated him. And something interesting was that in this match, to prevent interference, Steinberg had with him Roger Kilby, and Apollo had with him Invader number 2 in his corner. So this brought another match, and this time Steinberg made a challenge to Gran Apollo that if he could last 20 minutes in the ring with him, he could win $1,000. To make things fair, again, Apollo asked Invader 2 to be handcuffed to Roger Kilby, and in this match, Apollo lasted the 20 minutes, becoming immediately as the new face of wrestling in Puerto Rico. He was put over big time by Dick Steinberg during this mini feud during this time. Also during this time, during the month of February of 1980, Invader was in a feud with another Canadian wrestler named Stan the Moose Moravsky that led to a tape fist match, which is the specialty of Invader 1, where of course the master of the tape fist, Invader 1, won in the month of March. Something very interesting about Capital Sports Promotion during this time that I noticed while doing research for this podcast and the following ones were that during this period of 1980 to 1982, it seemed like they have different people as the main feud during particular months. In one month, it will be Carlos Colon, and the other month will be Invader, and the other month will be Jose Rivera, and the other month, the main feud will be Invader 1. So it kept things fresh, and it's something that you don't see that often, especially in the wrestling in Puerto Rico where we get the same main eventers. But during that time, you saw a lot of different people being like the hot feud at that moment. It will be somebody different at different times of the year. As an example of this, Abdullah came back in March and right away went to war with Carlos Colon for the Puerto Rico heavyweight champion, leading to a cage match on the March 6th card, where Carlos retained the Puerto Rico heavyweight title. A wrestler that was well known in the island, Crazy Luke Graham, who had come to the island wrestling for the Florida Championship Wrestling promotion, and also Capital, came back and right away won the North American Tag Team titles alongside a wrestler called El Mongo or El Mongol from Carlos and Eric Flores. Don't know who this particular Mongol was, but he was crazy look grand tag team during this period of time. Invader really did not have a chance to recover from the Muse feud when a mortal enemy came back to the island looking for vengeance, and this was Pierre Martel, who attacked Invader and reignited the feud they had when Martel blamed Invader for killing his brother with the heart punch, and they feud in other types of matches during this month of match all around Puerto Rico. Other feuds during this time was the feud between Ciclón Negro and Mr. Fuji for the North American title that led to a match where both were karate gloves, with Mr. Fuji defeating Ciclón Negro. In April, the war between Invader and Pio Martel was the hot feud of the month, and it ended with one match with Invader stealing the boot of Pierre Martel, which was famously loaded, the famous loaded boot of Pierre Martel. And Invader started using it against him for the following weeks while Pierre Martel kept trying to recover his boot, his loaded boot, which he did at the end of April. All of this ended in a match in Iran Bison Stadium on May 10, where both faced each other in a cage match, with Invader with his tight fist and Martel with his loaded boot. And of course, Invader won the war and ended the feud that way. April and May also saw some wrestlers come in for a couple shows, including part owner Gorilla Monsoon, wrestlers like Gamma Singh, Bulldog Browser, Mighty Eagle, Dory Funk, and even David Sammartino came to the island, which it was for me. I didn't know that David Sammartino first started wrestling in 1980, and also that he came to the island during this time. And I also believe it was the first time that female wrestlers came to the island. In this case, Wendy Richter and Judy Martin came to the island, under the Capital Sports Promotion or banner. After his feud with Invader, Martel started attacking Mr. Fuji, where they won the North American Tag Team titles. So Fuji was also in a hot feud with Carlos Colon, which had a series of matches where in one match, Fuji cut Carlos' hair, which of course led to a hair versus hair match between Carlos and Mr. Fuji, where Mr. Fuji lost his hair. But this was not the only news with Fuji during this month, as he was part of one of the biggest turns in the history of Puerto Rico, as in a match between Carlos Colon and Jose Rivera, facing the North American Tag Team Champions, Mr. Fuji and Pierre Martel. Martel lost by a man move of the team, and after the match, Hugo Sabinovich and Mr. Fuji blamed and attacked Pierre Martel and betrayed Martel, who did a stretcher job. And he went from being literally one of the biggest heels in the island to one of the biggest and most loved faces in the island of Puerto Rico. I remember that people to this day, remember Pierre Martel, this real bad rule breaker, and now this amazing baby face. And they say that he had a funeral home in Puerto Rico, that he speaks Spanish. I mean, Martel became one of the most loved wrestlers to ever wrestle in the island. And it was incredible how he went from one extreme to the other. Pierre Martel came back with a vengeance to battle Mr. Fuji in a wild and bloody field. To counter and attack Martel, Hugo Sabinovich, who was also the manager, and Mr. Fuji, brought a wrestler named Toru Tanaka, and both went on the attack on Martel, who went with different partners into, of course, he asked for the help of the man who had been his biggest enemy. Invader wanted to be a tag team with him to battle the duo of Tanaka and Mr. Fuji. During this time, Martel defeated Fuji to become the new North American Heavyweight Champion. During this time, also the World Wrestling Council Capital Sports created their junior heavyweight title and named Les Thornton as their champion in one of those fake tournaments that were held in Rio de Janeiro, right next to the Intercontinental title one, and set up El Gran Apolo to be the main challenger of the title. Another feud that was going on during this time was Jose Rivera involved in a feud with Crazy Luke Graham over the Caribbean title. And again, they were always like a big feud, and in this case, it was the Martel Fuji feud. And then there were also secondary feuds like Jose Rivera with Luke Graham, Jr., and Les Torton versus Gran Apollo. And if you're wondering where was Carlos Colon during this month, well, according to Manuel Gonzalez records, he was in Africa being part of a wrestling tour. So that's where he was during this time. But while he was absent, the action was still pretty hot in the island. The feud between Invader One and Pierre Martel batting Mr. Fuji and Tanaka continued to heat up, ending with Invader in his tight fist and Pierre Martel with his loaded boot facing Tanaka and Mr. Fuji. Hugo Sabinovich, during this time, had interfered in a whole bunch of matches of El Gran Apolo, and that also led to a series of matches between them, including a cage match. Carlos Colon came back from that tour, and him and Jose Rivera start battling Duddy and Teddy Funk for the World Tag Team titles, but the heels continue to prevail, and I think to this day, they have been the longest reigning tag team champions in the history of Capital Sports Promotion. I think it was like 3 years that they held the title. Outside the ring, in the NWA convention held that year, I believe, in Reno, Nevada, Victor Jovica was named to be part of the board of directors after being accepted to the NWA the previous year, 1979. In September, remember that feud between Fuji and Martel? Well, that led to the North American tag team titles being declared vacant. And in September, Capital Sports announced that they will have a tournament to determine the new North American titles that have been declared vacant since Fuji had turned on Martel. The tag team in that tournament that were going to be participating were, of course, the main tag team in Puerto Rico babyface-wise, Carlos and Jose Rivera, the Funk Brothers, Tanaka and Mr. Fuji, Chief Thundercloud and Chief Warcloud, Mighty Igor and Jose Miguel Perez's father, Dutch Mantel and Danny Condrey, who later gained War Star status as the Honky Tonk Man in the WWF years later. The story, according to Dutch in his podcast, was that the original member that was going to be his tag team was Dennis Condrey from the Midnight Express, but at the last minute he balked from going, having Dutch to ask Wayne and asking him to change his name as the promotion was already advertising Dennis Condrey, and they brought him in as Danny Condrey and just blame it, on a typo in the wrestling cards. It's professional wrestling for you. And Casey Luke Grant and Gamma Singh and Abdullah the Butcher and the Cheat. In what was a surprise move at the time, Invader 1 picked Pierre Martel instead of his usual partner, Invader number 2, to be his partner, leaving Invader 2 to have a tag team with Gran Apolo, and Invader 2 questioning why he was pushed aside. After a long night or long tournament, the winners of the tournament were Carlos Colon and Jose Rivera. The next challengers were picked from the winner of a match between Mr. Fuji and Tanaka and the team of Mantel and Condrey. Dutch Mantel and Danny Condrey won that match and subsequently wrestled for the tag team titles in October. But that was not the only thing going in the island. Abdullah the Butcher had come back and had set his sights on the Puerto Rican title held by Carlos, and another chapter in the feud happened after a couple matches between them in September where Hugo Sabinovich continued to interfere, which led to a match between Carlos and Abdullah on October 4th, where Hugo will be watching the match in a cage where Carlos defeated Abdullah the Butcher again. The tension between Invader and Invader 2 came to an head when Invader 2, still bothered by not being picked for the tournament, violently turned on Invader 1, hurting him for a couple of weeks, igniting an incredible feud between them during this time of the year 1980. In the tag team scene, Mantel and Condrey became the new North America champions, defeating Colon and Rivera, igniting another tag team war. When Invader 1 recovered, Pierre Martel came to the rescue of Invader 1 and fought Invader number 2 until Invader 1 came back, leading to a bloody feud between them. Strongbow returned that month and had a war against Luke Graham, winning the Caribbean title. and a feud that led to a strap match between them. Invader 1 returned and wrestled Invader 2. Well, I'm sorry. Luke Graham and Strombo battle. It led to a strap match between them. Invader 1 returned and wrestled Invader 2, and they face each other in a tape fist match. The craziest wrestler, known as the Chick, came to WWC for a week to battle Carlos Colon for the Puerto Rico title, while he was also feuding with Dutch Mantel and Condrey, leading to a barbed wire match between Carlos Colon and the Chick. Toru Tanaka left the promotion and was replaced by another Japanese legend that I think you guys might have heard of him, Atsushi Onita. During this time, Capital Sports Promotion announced that the NWA World Heavyweight Champion was going to be defended for the first time under the Capital Sports Promotion banner in the Three Kings Day card of 1981, and that they would determine the winner or the one who will face Harley Race for the championship in a match to determine who were going to be challenging for the title. And a match was announced for the December 13th card, of course, between Carlos Colon and Abdullah the Butcher, in a match that Carlos Colon won, setting the big match between him and Harley Race. Also in December, the island was too big for both wrestlers, so a loser leaves town match was announced between Invader 1 and Invader 2, and Invader 1 defeated Invader 2. The Martels, in this case Rick and Pierre Martel, challenged the World Tag Team Champions to Funk for the titles. Dennis Condrey or Wayne Ferris became the Caribbean title holder, defeating Jay Strombo, and Fabulous Moolah defended for the first time the women's title in Puerto Rico. So as you can see, 1980 was a great year for Wrestling Council Capital Sports Promotions. Big names as Abdullah the Butcher, Bulldog Brasso, Luke Graham, Gorilla Monsoon, Mr. Fuji, Toru Tanaka, Cheek, and others gave their glory to WWC and had some pretty wild feuds and storyline. What was going to be of Capital Sports Promotion during the year 1981 with the new alliance with the NWA, and what great feuds, storylines we were going to see? Well, come back in 2 weeks when we will be discussing the year 1981. So I hope you guys have liked this little review of the year 1980 of Capital Sports Promotion. And like I mentioned, there's really not a lot of videos of this time, if any at all. And there's discussion that some historians might have some, but they have not made them available to see. So hopefully one day they will show up. Like the other day, we found out in Puerto Rico, we used to get the Savodi IWC promotion, and we would watch it before they would watch from 79 all the way to 80, until they closed in 83, 84. We would watch it before we would watch Capital Sports Promotion. And we finally, the other day, found out that there was a video of that promotion in Spanish, the original Spanish transmission. And it was for the first time in almost 40 years that anybody have seen it. So hopefully one day somebody will show up with a Capital Sports Promotion show from the 1980 or 1981 era. That would be pretty awesome. I mean, they find out 1982, even better, because that was an unbelievable great year. So hopefully you guys like this, and hopefully you guys will come back in 2 weeks to hear the 1981 year in review for Capital Sports Promotions. Into them, please subscribe to an audio stories from the last territory in any of your audio platforms. And if you have a friend who might like this, please share it with them so they can also listen to the 25th other episodes. Into then, this is your friend Luis Cuevas the Cayman saying goodbye. And like I always say, sayonara, amigos.